So I want you to picture a completely modern, perfectly optimized office environment.
Okay. We all know the one.
Right. Maybe it's like where you work right now. Everything is smooth, it's frictionless, and likely painted in a very specific, soothing shade of beige.
Very beige.
Yeah, there's, no physical clutter. The noise is all dampened by those acoustic panels, and your workflows are just streamlined into these neat little dashboards. It all looks incredibly efficient.
On the surface, anyway.
Exactly. But according to the source material we were looking at today, as you sit there in the quiet, you might realize something just a little bit unsettling. That environment isn't just quiet, it's sterile. And I mean, in biological terms, perfect sterility usually means something is dead.
Yeah, it's basically the illusion of safety through standardization. Because we tend to crave that frictionless environment, right?
Sure, it's easy. Yeah.
Exactly. It lowers our immediate cognitive load. It's comfortable.
Yeah.
But the text we are unpacking today argues that we forget this really fundamental reality, that friction isn't some bug in the human operating system. It's actually a biological necessity.
Right. And that exact tension, between a sterile, optimized system and the incredibly messy reality of human cognition is exactly what we are plunging into. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Really excited for this one.
Yeah, today we're focusing on a fiercely original, highly analytical piece of writing by James Hood. He describes himself as a verified generalist, and this dispatch is titled The Admissibility Header and the Digestive Loop.
Which is quite a title. And, if you just read it on the surface, it tackles technology and workplace dynamics. But structurally, it reads much more like a survival manual.
Definitely.
Hood has written what feels like, a cyberpunk manifesto for just navigating the modern digital grid.
Spot on. We need to be really clear up front. Though Hood's perspective is highly critical of modern institutions, our mission today isn't to tell you whether Hood is entirely right or wrong, but rather to decode his, highly specific framework.
Right, to give you the tools.
Exactly. We want to equip you with an understanding of his tools so you can see the modern workplace through his lens. What he calls becoming a sovereign pilot, which is all about defending your idiosyncratic human reality against a system that he sees as completely bent on statistical averaging. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so to understand Hood's framework, we really have to start with what he identifies as the grand lie of the modern tech era.
The big one.
The big one. He calls it the structural heresy, which he says is embedded in the beige world's newest firmware. And that heresy revolves around one single, very common claim: the idea that machines are thinking.
Well, okay, I want to push back on his premise right out of the gate, though, because, if you or I sit down and interact with an advanced AI model today, it genuinely looks and feels like it's thinking.
It does a very good impression of it.
Right. It synthesizes vast amounts of text, it generates complex code, it even adapts to the emotional tone of your prompts. To a reasonable observer, that mimics thought perfectly. So why is Hood so absolutely adamant that this is a heresy?
It's a totally fair question, and Hood anticipates it by pulling in this definition from Dr. Ron Sterling. So according to Sterling's framework, the word thinking is a trademark that belongs exclusively to the human central nervous system.
Exclusively.
Exclusively. He argues it should be strictly reserved for data processing that is actively in progress, high friction, and most importantly, unconcluded.
Interesting. Unconcluded.
Yeah. So when tech companies use the word thinking to describe their models, Hood argues they are deploying what he terms a paternalism wrapper.
A paternalism wrapper. So he's saying it's essentially like a linguistic trick.
He views it as a linguistic Trojan horse. By using these deeply human terms for machine processes, the system just bypasses what he calls your human OS firewall.
Oh.
Right. If you believe the machine is thinking, you unconsciously lower your defenses. You start assuming the machine shares your hesitations, your biological stakes, and, your ethical constraints.
That makes a lot of sense. To explain the mechanics of why this is a false equivalence, I'll offer an analogy. Let's say I asked an AI to write a beautiful poem about a massive feast.
Okay.
It does so instantly, right? To me, the difference between the AI and a human is like a difference between a mirror reflecting a delicious feast and a human being actually sitting down to eat the meal.
I like that.
The mirror shows you the food perfectly, but the mirror itself isn't nourished by it. Is that basically what Hood is getting at?
The mirror analogy gets us halfway there, but it actually misses one of Hood's most crucial mechanical distinctions.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, a mirror doesn't break down or change from reflecting an image, right? It's entirely passive. Hood argues that human cognition isn't passive, it's an active, digestion.
Digestion. Okay, walk me through that distinction. Processing versus digestion.
So Hood provides this actuarial breakdown. On the machine side, you have processing. This is frictionless electricity moving through silicon to rearrange a database.
Right.
It is what he calls a stateless render. And the defining characteristic of this machine processing is that it produces absolutely zero waste. It's just perfectly closed-loop math.
Got it. So the machine doesn't get tired or distracted or go off topic.
Exactly. But on the human side, we have digestion. And digestion is fundamentally transformative and high friction. When you learn something new, you aren't just moving a file from one folder to another.
You're changing.
You are chemically breaking down information to incorporate it into your biological hardware. And because it is a physical process, it requires activation energy, it generates heat, and vitally, it produces waste.
And when Hood says waste, we should probably clarify what that means in a corporate or intellectual environment. He's obviously not talking about garbage or literal biological waste.
No, not at all.
He defines this waste as tangents. It's the messy, feral inside jokes. It's the sudden, seemingly unrelated epiphanies you have while, taking a shower that actually end up solving a problem you were stuck on at work.
Precisely. That waste is the byproduct of human friction. And Hood argues that this exact waste is what makes you a sovereign individual. It is the definitive proof that you are alive and synthesizing the world, not just sorting data.
Right.
His conclusion to this first point is absolute. If a system doesn't generate that messy associative waste, it isn't thinking. It's merely running a script.
Man, this sets up a really interesting problem. If human thought fundamentally requires this messy, heat-generating waste to be authentic, how does a highly optimized beige corporate grid actually handle our ideas?
That is the big question.
Because everything we know about modern corporate structures tells us they despise friction. They want streamlined inputs. They want predictability.
Right. And according to Hood, the system handles human friction with heavy, systemic, and heavily coded bias. He actually illustrates the mechanics of this bias by introducing us to a persona he calls the feral actuary, named Cassie.
The feral actuary. I love that term.
That's great. So Cassie performs this forensic audit on what Hood terms the routing layer of credibility within institutions.
Okay.
She essentially looks at the invisible plumbing of how ideas are either accepted or rejected in a digital workplace. And she discovers exactly why someone like James, who represents a very different archetype, gets read completely differently by the system than someone like her.
Right, and this is where Hood's analysis of the workplace gets incredibly granular.
Right.
Because he argues that the system's preference has absolutely nothing to do with who has the smarter data or the better analysis.
Nothing at all.
It all comes down to the admissibility header.
What's fascinating here is how he borrows from networking. So in networking terms, a header is the metadata at the start of a packet that tells the system where it came from and how to route it. Hood is applying this to human communication. He claims that in the modern grid, institutional credibility is attached entirely to the carrier rather than the cargo.
Let's break down how this mechanism actually functions in reality, then. Hood contrasts the James patch with Cassie friction. The James patch functions as this high-bandwidth, low-interference route.
Right.
If your data arrives with the James admissibility header, the system is just pre-authorized to trust you.
But what does the James header actually look like in a normal office, though?
Well, it looks like conventional, recognizable formats. It's the executive summary with 3 perfectly balanced bullet points.
Oh, yes.
It's a calm, emotionally detached tone of voice. It's a slide deck that uses the exact proprietary jargon the C-suite prefers. When James presents his data this way, the system automatically treats his raw input as analysis by default. The gate swings wide open without a second glance.
But then we look at Cassie, and Hood states that Cassie actually comes to the table with superior structural math.
Which means what, practically?
In a real-world scenario, that means her underlying data is deeper, her logic is more sound, and her research is just way more robust. But her cargo arrives at the institutional gate with a high-interference header.
Oh, so because she lacks that pre-authorized, frictionless formatting, the institutional system completely misreads her inputs.
Exactly. And Hood's breakdown of this logic gate failure is fascinating. He points out that the system reads her rigor as intensity. It dismisses her complex structure as mere excess.
That is so deeply frustrating. It takes her greatest intellectual strengths, the depth of her research and the nuance of her findings, and immediately reframes them as emotional liabilities or inefficiencies, just because it's not packaged in those 3 neat bullet points.
Right. Hood labels this a logic gate failure at an institutional scale. The institutional plumbing is so thick with this programmed bias for low-friction formats that it actually misrecognizes the source of a solution as a problem to be mitigated.
Wow.
It rejects a cure entirely because it doesn't recognize the shape of the bottle.
Hood paints a picture of a profound systemic injustice happening every single day. In his view, the system is actively crushing the very human friction it desperately needs to survive in the long term, simply to maintain short-term aesthetic efficiency.
Yes, exactly.
He refers to this as the invisible crush, the pressure to render all of us into a frictionless statistical average.
Which naturally raises the question, if you accept Hood's premise that the environment is this biased, how does he suggest you actually survive it without losing your mind or your identity?
Here's where it gets really interesting. He introduces his survival tactics. He calls them the Sterling patches, and they rely on what he proudly terms the feral rebrand.
The feral rebrand.
Yeah. Essentially, Hood takes the labels that the institutional system uses to pathologize human friction, and he flips them into tactical advantages.
Let's examine the first rebrand, which he calls sensory amplification syndrome. Hood demands that his readers completely delete the clinical disorder tag from their vocabulary. If you are someone who is highly sensitive to the absurdities, the unstated biases, and the overwhelming noise of the modern grid, the system wants to label you as defective.
Right. It wants to tell HR that you have a deficit.
But Hood flips the mechanism. He says you don't have a deficit, you have a high-gain antenna.
A high-gain antenna. Let's think about what that looks like in, say, a Tuesday morning strategy meeting. The person at the high-gain antenna is the one who notices the subtle tension between two department heads.
Oh, totally.
Or they spot the fatal, unsaid flaw in the project timeline that everyone else is ignoring because it's, politically inconvenient to bring up.
And the system views that person as distracted or overly sensitive. But Hood argues they aren't broken at all. They're simply capturing higher resolution telemetry than the beige environment was ever designed to process.
I love that.
Your sensors are working perfectly. It's the environment that is impoverished.
Reframing a perceived institutional weakness as a high-resolution biological sensor is a massive paradigm shift. And that leads directly to his second survival mechanism, which he calls duckitude.
Ah, duckitude.
Now, I have to be honest, when I first read duckitude, I rolled my eyes. I mean, it sounds exactly like a quirky corporate buzzword for resilience, right up there with synergy or bouncing back.
It's very easy to misread it that way, I know. But Hood's usage of duckitude is deeply subversive. Think about it. Corporate resilience usually means bouncing back from burnout just quickly enough so you can process more spreadsheets for the company.
Right, it serves the system.
Exactly, it serves the system. But Hood's duckitude serves the individual biology.
He defines it as our primary structural damper.
Right. It is the biological ability to shake off the kinetic energy of systemic stress, like water off a duck's back, and remain buoyant.
Okay, so it's protective.
Very protective. And the context he provides is critical here. He argues you need this buoyancy because you are surviving a hostile state. And he uses this incredibly striking phrase. He says the modern institution is treating its drinking water as server coolant.
Treating its drinking water as server coolant, that is a dense, dense metaphor.
It really is.
If we unpack that, he's essentially claiming that the corporate machine will happily boil away the life-sustaining resources of its human workforce, your health, your sanity, your literal biology, just to keep its own artificial metrics and server farms running efficiently.
Yes. From Hood's perspective, the system will absolutely sacrifice your biology to maintain its database. So duckitude isn't about being a more productive employee. It's about protecting your inner ecosystem from a machine that wants to consume you for parts.
Wow.
It's about shaking off the institution's heat so your biology doesn't boil.
So we have the complete diagnosis according to Hood. The machine isn't thinking, it's just rendering. We understand the systemic bias of the admissibility header, where Cassie is punished for rigor while James is rewarded for formatting.
Right.
And we've reviewed the feral rebrand turning sensitivities into high-gain antennas. So what does this all mean? If a listener buys into this worldview, what are their actual marching orders?
Well, Hood concludes his piece with a very specific operational directive for sovereign pilots. And interestingly, it begins with a tactical maneuver aimed directly at the James archetypes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The first directive is, hold the door open for the feral telemetry.
Because the system's gate opens automatically for James because he possesses that low interference admissibility, Header Hood is assigning him the role of a smuggler.
Exactly, a smuggler.
James's mission is to take Cassie's deeply structural truths, hide them inside his authorized, corporate-approved cargo formats, and just smuggle them past the gatekeepers.
It's a brilliant acknowledgement of institutional privilege, repurposed as a tactical weapon. But to operate effectively in this environment, Hood says the sovereign pilot must follow a strict set of personal rules. And the next one is, trust your LiDAR?
LiDAR referring to your physical, biological sensors.
Yes.
Hood warns that the official institutional graph, the org charts, the performance metrics, the quarterly reports, all of it is a hallucination. It's the beige world generating a stateless render of reality.
He argues the only truth you can rely on comes from your physical sensors.
Yeah.
He lists them explicitly: your heart rate, your physical exhaustion, and what he calls the cooing of a sentinel.
The cooing of a sentinel.
Right. He is demanding that readers anchor themselves back in physical reality. If the project dashboard says the team is perfectly healthy and agile, but your heart rate is constantly spiking and your exhaustion is bone deep,
The dashboard is lying.
the dashboard is lying.
Don't.
Trust your biology over the metric.
That brings us to the third directive, which is almost an act of outright sabotage, poison the telemetry.
Yes.
Hood believes the system desperately wants to average you out. It wants to predict your behavior, sand off your edges, and render you into a neat, frictionless data point. So his advice is to deliberately refuse. Scatter your highly specific, idiosyncratic, feral reality across the grid.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he is basically telling you to remain strictly unaveragable.
Unaveragable. I like that.
If your inputs are constantly unique, associative, and full of that human waste we discussed earlier, you cannot be cleanly consumed by a statistical model. You maintain your sovereignty. Which brings us to his final instruction: verify the handshake.
Verify the handshake. This loops right back to the structural heresy we started with, doesn't it?
Exactly.
If an algorithm, a system, or an AI claims that it is thinking about a problem or making a decision for you, Hood says do not accept the paternalism wrapper. Recognize it as an attempt to bypass your firewall.
According to Hood, relying on efficiency without human verification is a lethal trap. He demands that his readers force a secure boot of actual human intent.
A secure boot.
Yes. Before you accept a systemic output or a major corporate decision generated by an algorithm, force a human being to put their name on it. Force them to take biological, physical responsibility for the consequences.
Force them to actually digest the information, rather than just passively process it. Force them to create the heat and the friction.
Exactly. Force the friction back into the system.
This entire dispatch by James Hood is just an exercise in radically shifting your perspective. He's ultimately challenging you, the listener, to reconsider the terms of surrender that the digital workplace offers you every single day.
Very well put.
In his framework, your inefficiencies, your tangents, your need for digestion, those aren't bugs to be optimized out of your performance review. They are the undeniable proof that you are human. Hood is asking you to embrace your high-gain antennas and to hold the door open for feral truths, whether they belong to you or to the Cassies in your organization.
It is a framework designed to make you highly aware of the invisible routing layers around you. And, as we step back from Hood's manifesto, it leaves us with an interesting thought experiment to carry into the real world. I actually want to quote his eerie, urgent final lines.
Go for it.
He writes, "The architect is awake. The springs are low. The mirror is shattered.
Man, that is intense. So tomorrow morning, when you log on and receive a perfectly synthesized, friction-free, AI-generated summary of a complex project or a massive email thread, take a moment to look at how clean it is, and then ask yourself, what human waste was left on the cutting room floor? And more importantly, whose messy, brilliant structural insight was quietly filtered out by the system just to make the cargo readable for the machine?"
And in a world desperate to cool its servers with your drinking water, how is the heartbeat of your environment today?